So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My good name is Delvin Wenani. And this time I want to take this opportunity. To welcome you back to my channel. I'm going through some modules here on CBLMS. CBLMS is an online self-paced online training that helps educators, especially for the grade 10, to be able to gain more knowledge on how to handle the new curriculum, especially in the grade 10. So on Unit 3, it's talking about assessment of learning outcomes. And maybe I'll start by saying this, that in CBE, and CBE is quite different from 844. So in CBE, or what we call the Competency-Based Education, learning outcomes are supposed to be clear and they're supposed to be measurable. That is, they are supposed to inform you on what the learners know, what learners can do, or which value the learner has gained after a learning experience. So, in this case, we are talking about assessment of learning. So this assessment of learning should ensure content, that is to ensure content relevance to specific competencies, and should also guide, that is teaching strategies across the pathways and tracks. And at the end, it should provide a fair basis for assessing progress. So learning outcomes, they matter because they clarify what we call expectations. They support personalized learning focused on mastery. They inform resource planning, and they enable transparent evaluation. Now, I want us to look at the unit outcomes. So I want first of all to look at the unit outcomes so that we look at, as we are going through this, what are some of the unit outcomes that we're supposed to know at the end of this unit. So by the end of this unit, that is the participant, you and I, as the educators or instructors, we should be in a position to explain the purpose, the principle, and benefits of assessing learning outcomes within a competence-based framework. We should also be able to demonstrate understanding of continuous assessment and its role in supporting learner growth and progress. Number 3, as an educator and an instructor, you should be able to design and implement an authentic, inclusive, competence-based assessment that reflect what we call real-world tasks. And by the end of the day, should align with learning outcomes for senior school and vocational skills levels of CBE. And then another outcome, you should be able to align assessment tasks with curriculum standards and learning outcomes across the cognitive, psychomotor, and affective domains. So maybe what is the purpose of assessing learning outcomes? Maybe that is the major question that we ask ourselves. What is the purpose of assessing learning outcomes? So number 1, which is a very common one, is to provide feedback on learners' acquisition of competencies to themselves, to the instructors, that is the teachers, to the parents, and also to the stakeholders, and also to the stakeholders. And at the end of the day, it will support in informing the school on choices, specializations in senior school and vocational skills. It will also help teachers to improve what we call instructional strategies, which are tailored specifically specialization enhancing learning experiences across diverse career and academic options. Then number 3, which is very important here, it's to gather evidence so that to guide on appropriate interventions such as differentiated learning, to ensure that learners thrive within their chosen pathway. Another importance of this is to inform parents and also the guardians about the learner's educational needs. And this one enables targeted, or what you call, support alignment with future transitions. Because at the end of the day, the learners should transit. Another one is to identify and nurture learners' abilities in self and peer assessment. That is fostering responsibility and readiness for higher learning or the world of work. It also informs parents and also the guardians about learners' education needs, and this one will enable targeted support alignment with future transitions. It also supports decisions on transition, placement, and certification within pathway-specific contexts. That is ensuring smooth progress to tertiary education or employment. Now, another purpose of assessing learning outcome is to establish levels of competencies acquisition to determine readiness for specialization, certification, or career preparation. It also helps to highlight so that we can be able to see the resource, what we call the resource gaps that may hinder effective curriculum delivery across different tracks and pathways. And then lastly, but very important, it helps to inform policymakers, that is like the Ministry of Education, and curriculum developers, like now the KICD, on areas that they need intervention, and also to strengthen pathway relevance and learner transition outcomes. Now, next, I want us to talk about the steps in assessing learning outcomes. The steps in assessing learning outcome. Now, there are quite a few steps here that we shall look at. Now, the step number 1, before you assess the learning outcome, you need to review the curriculum outcomes. The curriculum has its own outcomes. So you need to go back to the learning outcomes in the curriculum design. Confirm what learners were expected to achieve in terms of the knowledge, in terms of the skills, and in terms of the values. That is the first thing. Before you start assessing the outcome, you need to go back to the learning outcomes that were highlighted in the curriculum design. Then confirm what learners were expected to achieve in terms of the knowledge, the skill, and also the values. Then after you have done that, now the second thing is you check the alignments. Now, yes, you have reviewed the curriculum outcome, but now are they aligned? So check the alignment. And in this case, ensure that your assessment tasks match the intended outcomes. What you assess should reflect what you taught according to the curriculum design. Then the third stage, or the third step, is now you select an appropriate assessment method. Now you need to choose a tool that will suit the type of learning test. That is, you should choose tools that suit the type of learning test for knowledge, practical task for skills, and reflections or observations for attitudes and values. Then step number 4, you now design a realistic and inclusive task. This is where now you create an assessment task that mirror what we call the real life or real world situations. And they can be able to do what? To accommodate different learner needs across the pathway and tracks. Okay? Then the step number 5, you should use clear criteria, especially when you are doing your assessments. So develop rubrics or a checklist to guide marking and help learners understand expectations. From a rubric or from a checklist, learner will be able to understand what are your expectations when you are giving them that assessment. Then number 6, gather evidence of learning. So now collect samples of learner work, observation notes, or portfolio to show progress and achievement. Then after you have done that, the step number 7 is now you analyze and you analyze the results. So review the evidence to identify who met the outcomes, who needs support, and what patterns are emerging. And then number 8, you now use the insights to improve learning. That is, adjust your teaching, offer remediation, or enrich learning based on what assessment it reveals. And then the last one, for any assessment that we shall do, report and reflect. Those two, report and reflect. So that is, you need to share your feedback with learners and parents. Then reflect on your teaching and assessment practices. Very important. You need to reflect on your teaching and assessment practices. And this one is majorly for what? To improve future delivery. I'll talk about modes. Maybe quickly, I want to talk about modes of, we call them the modes of assessment. Now, maybe what's a mode of assessment? So modes of assessment simply refers to ways teachers evaluate progress. That's a mode. Way teachers evaluate the way, that is the different ways or various ways the teachers evaluate learners' progress in terms of performance and mastery of what? Competencies. We call it what? Mode. Now in senior school, I'm talking about senior school here. In senior school, assessment should be closely aligned with the learning outcome. As I said, before starting your assessment, before starting the assessment of learning outcome, you need to know what are the outcomes. So in this case, assessment should be closely aligned with the learning outcomes. Okay, outline in the curriculum design. So you should not come up with an assessment without a reference from the curriculum design. So under the competence-based assessment approach, we have the following modes which are emphasized and recommended for classroom practices. Number 1 is what we call an authentic assessment. Now, an authentic assessment involves evaluating learners through tasks that reflect real life situations and challenges. It emphasizes the practical application of knowledge and skills, and also encouraging creativity, problem solving, and critical thinking. Now, this mode supports diverse learner strengths and promotes what we call deeper engagement. So examples in this case are case studies, fieldwork, role plays, simulations, community-based projects. Then the second mode of assessment is what we call an alternative assessment. Now, alternative is non-traditional methods that allow learners to express their understanding in a flexible and open-ended ways. Now, when you come to alternative assessment, they are what we call learner-centered. They are actually learner-centered, and they promote what we call reflection, self-assessment, and personalized learning experiences. A good example of this one is the use of essays, journals, presentation, and portfolios. Okay. Then we have the third one, which is very common, and we have been using it in 844, is what we call performance assessments. Now, in performance assessment, This is where now the learner is required to carry out tasks that demonstrate their skills and understanding. These tasks are evaluated using rubrics or clearly defined criteria. This mode is particularly effective for assessing competencies in what we call psychomotor, what can you do with your hand, and affective domains, focusing on both the process and the final product. We are looking at how you followed steps and the end product. So example here are scientific experiments like the practicals. We have the oral explanations. We have artistic performance and research projects. Now, maybe I can just quickly look at now types of assessments. I know we are familiar with this. For those ones who have gone through maybe through the training, they were able to be taken through, but allow me just to go through very fast types of assessment. And before maybe I go to the types of assessment, the question you need to ask yourself is, what is an assessment? What is an assessment? An assessment is just a purposeful and systematic process of gathering information. And the information should be from multiple sources. And that's why it is different from examination. With grade 10, we are assessing them. We are not examining them. So when you are doing an assessment, it means you have to gather information from multiple sources before you make what you call an informed decision about what the learners know, can do, and the values they have developed, as well as to identify areas where further learning is needed. So we don't just use one, like now maybe end term exam and then you gauge and say maybe this learner is in this level. No, you need to gather so many. That's why it's called an assessment and it's not called an examination. Now, within the competence-based education, assessment is continuous and is designed to support and enhance learning rather than merely measure it. So assessment administered under CBE are broadly categorized into two major types. We have the first one, which is called formative assessment. Now, formative assessment is continuous assessment and it's learner-centered, which gives feedback to the learner at the same time gives to the instructor. So it's a continuous learner-centered feedback used during instruction to support and to do what? To improve the learning. So in this case, we have things like assessment for learning, assessment as learning. Then we have classroom assessments. And then we also have school-based assessment. All of them, they fall under formative assessment. Assessment for learning, assessment as learning, classroom assessment, school-based assessment. All of them, they fall under the same formative assessment. And they include quizzes in class where you ask questions, lab tasks, you give them a practical, they perform, they write journals, reflections, and also portfolios. All these ones, they fall under formative assessment. Then we have summative. Summative now is done after instruction has been done. And this one is done to evaluate the learner achievement. And in this case is to help assign grades or certification. This one is done after, just to assign what? Grades and certification. And the major one here is what we call assessment of learning. And a good example here is end of term exams that we give. KJSEA, KCB, final projects, practical evaluations, all of them are summative assessments. Okay? Maybe I want to go back and look at this summative assessment, and I want to look at assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and school-based assessment. So let me go deeper and look at assessment for learning. Now, the keyword here is for. So we are assessing for. So assessment for learning is conducted before and during instruction. Before and during instruction. And this one is to identify what learners already know, that is before, and what they still need to learn, that is during. And it informs teaching and supports learner progress. I can give you an example. In STEM, we can use quick quizzes, lab tasks, coding, engineering, models, etc. In arts and sports, you can have what we call performance rehearsals, sketches, routines, and portfolios. In social sciences, you can have things like debates, reflections, civic projects. Then you have assessment as learning. Now, this one focuses on the learner. So assessment for learning was focusing on the instructor, that is the teacher. But assessment as learning now focuses on the learner's active role in monitoring and improving their own learning through self and peer assessment. So this one builds reflection and responsibility so that they can be able to do to reflect, okay? And also at the same time, it makes them to be responsible. And a good example of self-assessment here, we're talking about learners evaluating their own work using checklist. And then peer assessment, a good example is learners assess each other using rubrics or criteria. Then you have school-based assessment. Now, people confuse here, but school-based assessment are standardized formative assessment. Now, there's the word standardized, but they are still formative assessments. But this one, they are developed by NEC, administered and scored by teachers, with the results uploaded to the CBA portal. So, a good example in STEM is like what we call problem solving, coding, lab experiment I've already given you. In arts and sports, we have something like portfolios, sketches, and maybe performances. In social sciences, we can have things like concept maps, research, or civic engagements. So those are just examples of school-based assessments. So otherwise, thank you very much. That was a very short video on what I've gone through here. I'll be keeping you updated. I'll be keeping you updated with more information once I meet the information here. Otherwise, let us continue subscribing, supporting our work, so that the next time I upload the next video, you'll be the first one to be noticed. Otherwise, be blessed and bye-bye for now.